I took the scenic drive to one of the premier places on the planet when it comes to antique and classic aviation. That would be Blakesburg, Iowa, of course, the home of the Antique Airplane Association. There I met the 3 generations of the Taylor family who run the AAA. I asked them if they could show me one of their favorite airplanes. It took a little doing because they have so many favorites. But after some discussion, they decided Ben would show me their Ryan STA. Here's Ben.
Hi, my name is Ben Taylor. We're here at the Antique Airfield near Blakesburg, Iowa, and we're looking at the Air Power Museum's 1938 Ryan STA. It was a gift to us from a gentleman by the name of Don Cargill in Michigan, and it's a wonderful looking airplane and it's a wonderful flying airplane. It's the 3rd to last civilian STA ever built. These particular airplanes morphed into what they called an STM for a foreign market. The M stood for military. They were exported all over the world, Central and South America, Australia, New Zealand, a few to China. There was a handful that went to China, and then they became the PT-20 for the United States military, and they were initially designed as an airplane to train pilots with. This particular Ryan is a favorite of the people that work and volunteer here at the Air Power Museum and at Antique Airfield because it's so rare and it's such a beautiful airplane and it flies so nice. We've had it a long time. We've had it longer than I've been alive. I was a little kid and got to ride around in this airplane quite a bit. So it's very close to me and my family. And it's just a great flying airplane. And like I said, it's rare. There's probably maybe a dozen of them in flying condition in the country right now. And they're a prized possession of everybody that owns one. The control harmonization is great. It's very light on the controls. It's fun to do aerobatics in. It's fun to take people for a ride in. It lands nice. It's like landing on a pillow because the gear is so soft. It does have some strange characteristics on the ground, but nothing out of the ordinary. It's just a beautiful airplane to fly. It flies better than it looks. The fuselage is of all monocoque construction. Monocoque construction means that there are internal structural members. There's a bunch of steel rings that the outside skin is riveted to. This particular airplane is called semi-monocoque construction because it does have 2 horizontal longerons inside the fuselage that are riveted inside the fuselage for strength, and they are in the cabin area. But other than that, there's nothing running lengthwise inside except cables. The strength of the design, of monocoque design, gets its strength from the skin on the outside instead of the steel structure on the inside like a conventional airplane would be built at that time. When you get to the wire bracing of the wings, that's not a new method. That was a kind of an old method, but it being a low-wing monoplane was something to be talked about. Not a lot of airplanes were built that way at that time period. Everything was biplanes back then. That was the industry standard. It's not really the forerunner of the monoplane world. It's just it was another design out of a handful of designs that proved that monocoque construction was the new thing. It later turned into almost every airliner nowadays is made with that construction method. It did use aluminum as a fuselage covering, which wasn't really heard of at that point, other than in big transport airplanes. And it proved the lightweight and strength of the monocoque design. This particular airplane is very easy to work on. It's from an era when simplicity was at its best. They didn't put anything in the airplane that it did not need to go flying. It has the most complicated part about the airplane is working on the back of the engine because there's no room. And it has a rather strange brake setup in it as far as the actual brakes on the wheels. It's an odd design that it didn't really go for. They used them a lot in quite a few different airplanes, but they don't really work that great. And they're kind of a pain to work on. But other than that, and the fact that the engine's upside down, so anytime you have to do any work on the engine, you get oily because it does leak a little bit of oil. Other than that, it's a joy to work on. Flying the Ryan is it's very enjoyable. Other than it's blind, you fly it from the back seat, and on the ground you don't really have much to look at in front of you except for the instrument panel because the nose is so long. But you can peek your head out over the side and see down the runway just fine. it sounds really neat when you're flying it, because if you get it at the right attitude and the right speed, the wires sing. They actually hum a little bit. Taking off is just as straightforward as it is with any other airplane. Little carb heat, full power, push the carb heat back in and wait till the tail gets light, put the tail up so you can see where you're going, and when it's ready to fly, it flies. Landing is strange because it has such a soft landing gear. The Ryan ST series, they started building in late 1933, and the first 67 airplanes were built with a non-adjustable landing gear, which means you could, once you rig the airplane to fly right, if you look, the wires go directly to the landing gear. Once you rig the airplane to fly right, the landing gear could be going off in any general direction with toe in and camber. Later on, in I believe late 1935, when they got above 67 serial numbers, they designed and made a adjustable landing gear so you could make the landing gear straight and have the airplane fly right. This one is the third to last civilian model Ryan built, but it has one of their very early landing gears on it. So we don't land it on pavement. We just don't do it. It's because it can bite you on pavement because the landing gear is not pointing straight like it would be on a conventional airplane. The strange part about landing this airplane is that it's got such a soft spring landing gear, and it's got 8 inches of throw on the landing gear. So you can actually hear the wheels hit the ground before you feel the ground yourself. And if it does try to go sideways, like some tail draggers do, it's strange. If you put one wing down, instead of turning away from that wing like most tail draggers do, it can sometimes turn into that wing. Nobody really knows why. That's just part of the non-adjustable landing gear. I've flown probably 24 different types of airplanes, 2 of which were tricycle gear airplanes. The rest are all tail draggers, mainly old airplanes and home builds. And this is actually probably if not my favorite, my second favorite airplane to fly. This airplane has actually won an international aerobatic competition, not this particular airplane, but this model and type. The reason why is because it is so enjoyable to fly is because you can go out and do aerobatics in it easily. It doesn't have an inverted fuel system, but it does have a wobble pump in case the engine quits because you're upside down too long. I personally have only gone out and done wing overs and hammerheads with it. I've never turned this particular one upside down because it's not mine, and I'm not real big on doing aerobatics. The neat kind of different thing about this airplane is it has a little bit higher wing loading than airplanes I've flown before. Going fast and going downhill and pull too many G's, not too many G's, but pull more than 2 to 2.5 G's, the airplane starts to load up. And what I mean by load up is it goes from being a one-handed, nice and light on the controls, to having to use both hands because you're pulling so many G's. And usually this airplane, I believe, is stressed +6, -3, and I think I've maybe pulled 3 with it once, positive. I'm not real concerned with doing anything negative with it. That's not my thing. I'm not big into aerobatics. The Ryan Aircraft Company started out life early in the mid-20s. They became famous when they built the Ryan NYP, which is the airplane that Charles Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic solo in 1927. They went on to build high-wing cabin monoplanes that were similar in lines and setup as the Spirit of St. Louis. And then in the 30s, T. Claude Ryan designed the Ryan ST, and then on to the Ryan STA, and the STM, and the STA Special. They're 4 very distinct, not different, but very distinct models. They were all based on the same airframe with slight changes in engine combinations and cockpit combinations, and there's a few differences between them all. As far as I know, there are probably about a dozen to maybe 15 or 16 of these ST models flying, and then I can think of 5 or 6 other ones out there being restored as projects, and then there's 3 or 4 in museums. They were all built out in California. T. Claude Ryan actually had a flying school also that used these airplanes and as trainers, and the ST stands for Sport Trainer. And the STA was, they actually called it the STA, or the STA Super Special. The ST was originally designed with a 95 horse C4 Monasco, which is the same basic engine that this airplane has. Then they went on to the STA, which had the D4, which was 125 horse Monasco. And then the STA Special had 150 horse supercharged Monasco, which was the C4S. Well, now that we've gone over general aspects of the airplane, let's take a look at some more specifics. Come back here to the tail, explain a few of the design features of the airplane. It has a very nice slender Art Deco style tail. It's wire braced by stainless steel streamline wires on both the top and the bottom. Underneath, it has a steerable but non-full swivel tail wheel. Both elevators have movable trim tabs for pitch trim, and then the rudder has a fixed trim tab for yaw trim. The whole tail is streamlined. It comes back to a round circle to the end of the fuselage, and then they stamped out a beautiful compound curve tail cone on both sides of the rudder. And then the horizontal stabilizer and the vertical stabilizer will have nice fillet fairings to keep everything nice and smooth. Beautiful lines and streamlining was important back then. It's not so important now. Streamlining is, but not a beautiful airplane like this is. This is the original style logo that Ryan used on the new Ryan, which was when they went from big airplanes to little airplanes. Well, now we'll go up to the cockpit and talk about the things up here. It's a two-place airplane. This particular airplane you solo from the rear seat only, which was very common in the 20s and 30s. Inside the cockpit, we have a removable seat cushion so you can wear a seat pack parachute for doing aerobatics. It does have flaps. They come in 4 positions. I believe it's 10, 15, 20, and 30-degree positions. A throttle quadrant with a throttle and a mixture control. A control stick like a normal airplane. Rudder pedals that have heel brakes. And then a basic VFR panel. This airplane does have a small, narrow, useful load. If you fill it full of gas and oil, you can only have a 170-pound pilot in the back and about a 100-pound person in the front to keep it within the published limits. Everything about this airplane is manual. There's no electrical system. We have the manual flaps that go in 10, 15, 20, and 30 degrees. And then, of course, the stick moves the ailerons up and down. It does have the option to hook up nav lights, but we don't have them hooked up. Let's go around the corner and take a look at the wires. On top we have 2 landing wires. I call them landing wires because they hold the wing up when you're not flying. And on bottom we have 2 sets of flying wires, and they keep the wing from folding when you're flying. They keep the wing in place. And these are stainless steel, which is why they look like chrome, and they are of streamlined section, which means they're aerodynamically sound. It's not just a steel rod, a circle steel rod. It's actually a circle steel rod that's flattened out, so it has more aerodynamic characteristics. It's more streamlined. It goes through the air better. They're bolted right to the spars by I guess you could call it a knuckle, like on your finger, and onto fittings on the spars. And then the bottom ones, like I said, have 2 sets on the forward and the back, and they're attached to the landing gear. And down here we have the pitot-static tube, which is ram air for the airspeed indicator, and the static is for the altimeter. And that's about it as far as the wings go. So let's go ahead and talk a little more about the landing gear. It is a fixed landing gear, V, bolted to the bottom of the wing, and it comes to a point down here. Now there's a shock strut that bolts to the front of the wing, up inside of here, that moves up and down. Now when I talked earlier about not having an adjustable gear, when you rig this airplane to fly right or get the wings in the proper position for good flying characteristics, this landing gear can get pulled one way or the other, up or down, by these adjustable flying wires. When you do that, this landing gear can end up out here and pointed this way, or in here and pointed inside. When they made the adjustable ones, they made it so once you rig the whole thing, you could adjust the toe in and toe out and the camber of the wheel itself to make the airplane go straight down the runway. Now with this landing gear, you may be asking yourself how we air up the tires when they go at low. Well, the wheel pant is actually removable. Some people call it a wheel pant, some people call it a wheel spat, because it does cover most of the landing gear. But the landing gear is completely faired in for streamlining, and it looks good that way. But you unscrew this front half, and the front half pulls off, and you can service the wheels and brakes. Now when you do an annual inspection, all this stuff has to come off, and pulling this, and this off the airplane takes 3 hours aside. I do believe that if you pulled all these fairings off the landing gear on both sides, you would probably lose anywhere from 8 to 10 miles an hour in speed. That's how much streamlining this does for this airplane, on top of the fact that it makes it look good. Well, another nice thing about this airplane is the fact that it's easy to get into the engine compartment via all these Zeus fasteners. All you do is just make a quarter turn and they come loose. Pretty ingenious little design. Some of them are a little more stubborn than others, but it makes it pretty easy. And all 4 panels, you can uncover this engine with 4 panels, except for the nose section. And they all have compound curves in them. They're not completely flat. Sometimes you do have to wiggle the cowling side to get it off, but it comes out pretty easy. Well, inside the engine compartment on the left side, you can see the wobble pump, which is cable operated by a handle inside the airplane. You can see the intake, or the air box, and the carburetor, and then the intake manifold is down below this other panel. Spark plug wires. This has an unshielded ignition. It is a bed mount style engine. You can pretty much guarantee that you're going to lose a little bit of oil every time you fly the airplane, but that's part of old airplanes. This particular Monasco is a D487. It's 137 horse. Originally, this airplane would have had a 125 horse Monasco in it, which was a D4. The D487 was built under contract for the Royal Canadian Air Force during the war. The reason for that being is the English-built Gypsy Major, which was used in all the British trainers, was becoming in short supply for training pilots over in England. So they've decided to build and buy D487s. The difference between the two is they turn different directions, even though the Gypsy Major is a little bit more in horsepower. This one's 137 horse, which makes the airplane fly a lot better than I would assume 125 horse does. Well, let's take a look at the prop. It is a wood prop and it's laminated out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and probably 6 laminations. It's kind of hard to tell. It has what they call brass tipping, which is riveted on, and then the rivets are soldered. Out here at the tip, you can actually see the copper rivets that it's riveted in with. And this particular prop is a Phelan built prop. The joke is my prop's a Phelan. It's kind of funny. And then it does have a full spinner on it, and this is a new spinner that a friend of ours had made for his projects, and he gave us a spinner when ours broke. And it's cut very, very close by a close friend of mine. His name's Ryan Pemberton. Did all the cutting out of the spinner, out of the stock spinning. Fits good and it tracks real good and true. And it completes the look of the airplane. Without a spinner, they just don't look quite as good. Over here we have the 4 single bayonet exhaust stacks. The reason they call them bayonet is because they look like a bayonet on the end of a gun. The cool part about this airplane is that it does have an inverted engine. So when you go to start the airplane, you pull it through to make sure you don't have a hydraulic lock or a cylinder full of oil. And you'll notice when it gets pulled through that it will leak oil out 2 or 3 of the exhaust stacks onto the ground. Then when you start it up, it smokes for a couple seconds, which is kind of neat, makes it really look old, and then it quits because it's burned all the oil out. But it will splatter oil on the wing and the wheel pant and the stub strut and the wires, and even if there's enough in your face if you're in the back cockpit. But and then here we have the oil shutoff tool. We use this to shut the oil off when the engine gets shut off because it has what they call a dry sump engine. The oil tank is actually separate from the engine and it sits on top. And when it's hot and the oil's hot and you shut it off, all that oil will leak, if you don't shut the oil off, will leak back into the accessor case, then into the case, down into the cylinders, and out on the floor by the exhaust stacks and whatever leak you have around the rocker box covers. So we shut the oil off with our shutoff tool, and then we hang it there to remind ourselves to turn it on before we go flying the next time. Well, let's go ahead and put the cowl back on. Let's hope I can make it fit right. And just 1/4 turn to the right, and they're fastened. Great little invention. And now the old girl is ready to start up. Now that we've double checked to make sure the mag switch is turned off so the airplane can't inadvertently start, you always want to make sure before you touch a propeller that you're going to touch it like it's going to start. You want to be aware that that can happen because they can start on their own if touched wrong. So the next thing we do is we make sure we've got the oil turned on so we can get oil to the bottom of the engine. And then we take the oil shutoff tool, toss it in the baggage compartment so we don't lose it. Double check to make sure everything looks all right, and we start to pull it through. Now we pull it through a little bit to make sure that there's no oil in the bottom of the cylinders, which could give us a hydraulic lock and start bending parts. Then you just pull it through. It's got fairly low compression. Well, it looks like we probably don't have any oil in the bottom of the cylinders. So now we can go ahead and do the rest of the pre-start and start her up. My passion lies with working on old airplanes and flying old airplanes. That's my favorite thing to do. You know, I do it for a living and I also do it as a hobby. The reason I care so much about old airplanes is my grandfather. He was airplane crazy during the Depression. He grew up during the Depression, and then when he got out of the service in the 50s, started the Antique Airplane Association to help people save old airplanes from being cut up for scrap and used for dusters and sprayers and chicken coops and all sorts of things. And I actually started a pretty big following. There was a lot of other people in the country that felt the same way about them. And then the business snowballed, and my dad was born into an aviation family and learned how to fly at a young age. And then I was born to the same aviation family, and grew up riding in airplanes my entire life. By the time I was 10 or 12, I'd ridden in over 100 different types of antique airplanes. And then my grandfather found and bought and had restored the airplane that he learned how to fly in 1941 in Van Nuys, California. And once it was restored, it was about the time I started to learn how to fly, so I got to learn how to fly in it. So I soloed in the airplane my grandfather soloed in, and then when I turned on my 17th birthday, I got my pilot's license and graduated high school the following year. That fall, enrolled in A&P school at a local community college, and I get the chance to fly and help maintain a fleet of 40 plus old airplanes that the museum owns here on the airport. And that's probably the most rewarding part of my day, is getting to fly the airplanes that I work on. Old stuff is cool. It's just, you know, the big retro movement in the country with cars and motorcycles and boats even and airplanes is us harkening back to an easier, happier time in our society. And I think that's a lot of it, but old airplanes are simpler, they're easier to maintain, they look cooler. I mean, you can't not like how some of the old airplanes or all the old airplanes look. They just knew how to draw an airplane back then, and nowadays it's all plastic and electronics this and go fast that, and they don't build very many airplanes nowadays to just go out and have fun in. Go around the patch and see the neighborhood, fly low and slow or low and fast, or they don't build airplanes like they used to, just like they don't build cars like they used to. Well, the difference between old airplane people, per se, compared to just the general aviation population, the guy that owns a 172 to go see his kid in college or to go fly once a year, the big difference is that old airplane people love their old airplanes. They have a special relationship with their old airplanes, and they don't really own them. They take care of them, and then when it's their time to stop taking care of them, somebody else steps in and does the job. Well, at the Antique Airplane Association, the whole idea was started to save old airplanes. Airplanes were being scrapped or cut up. It's part of our history. It's part of who we are as a society. And in our case, old airplanes were a very large part in that time period in American history and European history. A lot of very neat old airplanes came out of Europe and England back in the 20s and 30s. And I see us, we started to help people maintain and restore their old airplanes, and it's needed. I mean, if we weren't here, there would be somebody doing it. I know a lot of people that, let's say, own a Stinson. They have a Stinson 108, and they follow Stinsons. They're religious about Stinsons. You know, they have a 108, but they like Stinson Juniors, and they like Stinson SM models, and they like Stinson Gullwings and Detroiters. And I'm more type specific or model specific instead of type specific. I like certain models of manufacturers and not all of them. Like I do like a lot of the Waco built airplanes because they're a very pretty airplane and they fly great. They're a beautiful flying airplane. The early square tail Stearmans I really enjoy because I have some time working on them and getting to ride in them, and they're just neat airplanes. But late 20s and early 30s racing stuff. That's kind of the subject matter that trips my trigger. Low and slow is fun too. I've got 200 or 300 hours in a Pete and Paul, which is a home-built design from the 20s. And it cruises at 75 miles an hour. It's a great airplane to go on a summer's evening, take one of the kids for a ride or the girlfriend for a ride and go cruise around the neighborhood. And I'm always thinking about some sort of airplane or a motorcycle project, but I'd like to home build a clip-wing monocoque, and not just any clip-wing monocoque, even though there hasn't been a lot of them built. But I would like to home build an exact replica of the first one when it was first clipped. It was actually a stock model 110 that Johnny Livingston sent back to the factory and had him put a shortened wing on. And then I'd like to build a replica of a QDC Waco, which was a 1931 cabin Waco. It was Waco's second attempt at the cabin airplane market, and it ended up being very successful. And then there's oh boy, Northrop Beta. It's the same size as a Ryan STA with a 450 horse Pratt & Whitney on the nose. It's all metal, and that airplane's always spoke to me. But well, the oldest airplane I've ever ridden in had to been a Hisso-powered Curtiss Jenny, which is one of our members from California restored, and it is insanely accurate, and it's a beautiful airplane. Just looking at how they build airplanes from that particular period, and how things improved in just a small time frame, in just 20 years, looking at airplanes from the late 30s compared to something from World War I, pre-World War I, late World War I stuff. It just amazes me at the technology then and how intricate things were on a mass-produced piece of machinery like that. But riding in it was neat. It has its own sound. It was the first Hisso-powered airplane I'd ever ridden in, and the only Hisso-powered airplane I've ever ridden in. And I was amazed at the acceleration and how fast it got off the ground, but being a big winged airplane with two big wings hanging out there, it climbed really well. But flying it was not quite as enjoyable. My best way to describe it is trying to stir a plastic ruler in a bucket of cured cement. Other than that, it was neat looking out, seeing the wires, all the wires jiggle around, and the rocker, not the rocker arms, that would be an OX powered one, but all the stuff moving and how everything, looking down in the cockpit and seeing how everything worked. Because you see everything. And it was like sitting on a bar stool the way you sat in there. You sat up very straight and up high above the floor, whereas a lot of airplanes you sit with your legs out in front of you. And the rudder bar was very close to where the seat was. It was a very neat experience. I'm glad I got to go for a ride in that airplane. Frank Schilling was very, very generous in having his friend take me for a ride in the airplane. I'm very appreciative of that one. That one will always stick in my mind for a long time. Flying is just, it's real. It's something that you can touch and feel and you can see, and it's not just seeing it on a screen. You get a little wind leaking in the door, or hanging your arm out the window, or, sticking your head out the window and looking down at the ground and seeing people walk around and wave, or, you fly over a river, you can feel the humidity. You fly over a lake and you can see the people running around in boats and waving, and flying it's freedom. It's just freedom, and it's the only thing I've ever known. My first airplane ride was when I was 9 months old in one of our museum's airplanes with my mom. I was sitting on my mom's lap, and according to my dad, I screamed a lot, but I was 9 months old. I think the most special aspect of flying or being around airplanes is the freedom that you get. You get to go up, in a car you can go left, right, forward, or backwards, but you have to adhere to where the road is for the most part. In an airplane, you can get in an airplane, you can take off, and you can go wherever you want. It's probably one of the last real freedoms that we have